Okay, welcome to the March 9th JupyterLab weekly call. Today we have what looks like, 22 people on the call. That's great. And if you haven't already, please find the agenda in the chat. Thanks, Jason, for pasting it in. And if you would like, please sign in. Please add any items you'd like to discuss in the agenda section of the minutes, and let's get started. The first person on the list today is Frederic.
I don't remember if I spoke about it last week. I think so. So I started to add a PR for testing some of our settings that are defining UI things like shortcut menus and stuff like that, to be sure that in core on the CI we can check that those data are not pointing to comments that does not exist. And the side effect I have implemented from it is to be able to produce a full list of the comments that are in JupyterLab for adding them to the doc. So for now, it just like create this table, the ID, the label, and is displaying the shortcut if any is defined. I get 2 questions for it. So one of the things that the test is enforcing now is that you should not have a comment that don't have any label. So we are sure there are some kind of documentation on every comment. So I did a couple of labels that were missing, let's say. So that's the first question is, does it make sense? And I will also appreciate if some English speaker can look at the wording, because that's not my strong side. And the other question is where to put it in the documentation. So for now, I put it at the command palette, but it doesn't make sense because the user is not seeing really that ID stuff. So if people have ID where it belongs, that will be nice. And that's it for me.
Maybe the command palette section should just be called the commands section and feature the list of commands and also the command palette.
Thanks, Darian. That's a good suggestion.
I had a question about the labels. So are the labels coming from JSON files, or are they coming from code? Like, does translation get applied to them?
So I'm using what's in the command registry. So if there are translation available, they will be available. So I'm using Playwright, so that means that we load fully JupyterLab, and then I'm injecting some JavaScript to say, oh, give me the command list, and from that command list, I'm asking all the label.
Cool. Any other comments?
Not every command is in the command palette, though every command can be called from the keyboard shortcut. So maybe it's better to group either command separately from command palette or with the keyboard shortcuts, or just make that clear even. And I mean, the subtlety here is not every command is added to the command palette, and some commands require arguments, and a specific set of arguments is added to the command palette, but the keyboard shortcut may specify other arguments to a particular command. So there's a little bit of subtlety here with grouping it with command palette.
Okay, thanks. I will rework then the section to make a top section comment and add those details then. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Jason W., you are up next.
Sure. All right. Well, so thanks everyone for the feedback that you've given so far on the cell toolbar. Let me, sorry, I can link the pull request here. Make sure I send it to everybody. So there is a binder as well, which I can link in the chat in case anyone wants to play around with it. So for those who are unfamiliar, the cell toolbar is something that I've been working on for a few weeks now. And I am currently adding this toolbar here, hope everyone can see my screen, to every cell. And it's designed to disappear. The current behavior is to have it disappear in case it would interfere with the content. So if I, for example, make this line longer, the cell toolbar disappears. When I make it shorter, it appears again. I've been talking with Fernando and some other folks about like ways to sort of shunt it out of the way in a way that you can make it appear again. I don't have anything to show you today. So this is the binder. I also have another concept here. Oh, this is not working. Let me try reloading my browser tab here. So based on some feedback I got from Lane, he was suggesting that we move the move up and down buttons to the left, and Lane is have something to show you just yet, but it was intended to kind of move those functional buttons to another place. They wouldn't get overridden by the content. So this is what things would look like. So with my alternative branch here, which is not yet available on GitHub, the cell toolbar, I have to stop saying incel. That means something I shouldn't say on a recorded line. So there's a 4-button toolbar, and then the up and down buttons get moved to the left. Lane had another concept, which I'm curious to get folks' opinions on, where there's this little invisible, I'm going to use the term grabber, that if I grab this, I can drag and move it up and down. The fact that it's invisible makes it very hard for a novice user to understand that there's anything here because it's just invisible. So what Lane was proposing to do was to add a, not necessarily a button, but an icon for the grabber that when you click on it, you can move it up and down. And I'm curious as to what folks think about that as a potential alternative to the up and down buttons. I also talked to, I don't know if Brian's on the call, but I talked to him about that as well. I see Isabella's got her hand up.
Yeah, I have so many accessibility questions about this PR, and it has been on my list to review it, and I haven't because I have a lot of questions about accessibility in a lot of places. So, and Mike is asking a good question with that in the chat. How would that work with the mobile layout? Is like a good way to test it. But so I guess what I'm saying is there either a like list of things that have been added so I can easily review, or like would it be possible to schedule like a call with you that forces me to sit down and start pressing buttons? Like, I don't know what your time commitment is, but I really do want to review this because this seems like there's so much, but I just haven't had a chance. So.
Oh, sure. So sorry for cutting you off there momentarily. So Isabella, I appreciate the concern about accessibility. In the pull request, Frederick added an interesting question that I don't have an easy answer for, which is about the accessibility of it. So if I put if I put this into command mode and I hit tab, it will select the first button on the toolbar. If I hit tab again, it selects the second button on the toolbar. Frederick made a good observation, which is that I think it's the W3C guidelines are that tab should focus the toolbar, and then left and right will then navigate within the toolbar. However, left and right are already bound in this mode to navigate between headings. So if I hit right, it's going to jump me to heading 1. And if I hit left, it's going to collapse the heading. And that's what left and right are meant to do in JupyterLab. So we're going to either need to unbind left and right when the cell toolbar is focused, or find some other way to navigate between them, or just leave the tab navigation as it is.
Yeah, we're absolutely going to run into conflicts. Oh, go Frederick. Yeah.
No, just to say that normally if the toolbar is focused, you can just stop the propagation of the event and you should be fine.
Well, I tried to do that, Frederick, and I found left and right were not even making it into the toolbar at all.
Wow.
So there is a stop propagation call that's already being made before it's up to me, Frederick. So I got to jump the queue or something, or unbind it temporarily. I also noticed that Mr. Grout said the heading navigation is very recent. I think it's a good feature, to be honest. I don't know if I should undo it in favor of this, but it creates a sort of a deadlock for me in that, like, I see the merit in being able to navigate using the arrow keys. We do have an alternative, which is to simply tab from button to button, which I know is not strictly in agreement with what the W3C recommends, but it does work.
That heading navigation, I think, was introduced very recently, and I don't think had a lot of overall review about adding that shortcut. So I wouldn't be opposed to taking a second look at that shortcut. And if it's complicating things in other places where we want an overall picture of how our shortcuts to behave, I think we could take a second look at it and reconsider it. But the longer we wait,
do we know who added that?
The harder it will be to reverse that.
Oh, for sure. And to be honest, like, I don't particularly dislike that heading navigation. I kind of like that. But at the same time, like, it was probably put in for a reason. You know, my conflict is going to affect that. Vidar, I see you've got a hand up.
Yeah, so in terms of accessibility, right? All the actions are currently available as shortcuts, right? Is it just about connecting a keyboard action to visual navigation, to the visual elements, right?
You're right. Go ahead, Isabel.
I am not confident that keyboard shortcuts constitute accessibility, because even though you can access the keyboard, like the shortcuts through your keyboard, which is some concern that we have, it requires you to be aware of these shortcuts, which may not be surfaced through a number of ways. Like
right.
Yeah, and also we're going to run into keyboard conflicts very easily, as we already have here. So I don't think it's reliable, is what I'd say.
Right.
Like it's a good bonus, but I wouldn't say that it is
it will work for some
yeah.
users, but not others. I see your point. So then the question is, how would this? Does this work well? Is this inside the code mirror element? Like the editor element?
In terms of like well,
like
it's
how
inside this. It's inside the cell. It reacts. The logic reacts to changes to the code mirror entity, but like it's not inside the code mirror editor. Does that make sense?
Right.
So nothing in the toolbar is novel functionality, right? This is all functionality that existed outside of the toolbar that there's now an additional way to access from within the toolbar.
Sorry, to clarify, the duplicate cell below is a new command that I actually don't think is in the command palette right now. So that's probably the only novel functionality that's in the cell toolbar, but it's not exactly essential functionality.
Well, you could add that to the command palette without any. Yeah, okay. So it seems as though there are on the one hand, there's definitely a conversation to be had about how to make the cell toolbar the most accessible it possibly can be. But there's also the how to mitigate any shortcomings by making sure there's multiple ways to access all the functionality there. So if it were accessible from the menus, from the command palette, and from the cell toolbar, and it turns out that there are technical limitations to exactly how accessible you can make a toolbar in this space, then at least you would never be adding something that locks some users out of that functionality. I would suggest, now that you've got this to a fairly polished demoable state, bringing this to the next accessibility call so that you can spend a good deal of time on it. Or, as Isabella says, you guys can schedule a private call if you wish, whatever you want. But it seems like it's at that point in its life cycle where it would be valuable to do that.
Coincidentally, I see that there's a accessibility call later this morning.
There is. You'll probably find a lot of the same people in it, but yeah, we can make up for time. Darian makes a good point. We have other agenda items. Thank you.
Yeah, if there's if there's too much on the agenda today, I can save it for the next one, but I really appreciate everyone's feedback on that.
No, there's too much on the JupyterLab agenda today. I'm pretty sure for accessibility, the accessibility specific call, we have time if you're interested.
Okay, let's continue the conversation there then. I've got a couple other things on my calendar, but I can move those.
Awesome. Thank you for the demo and thank you for pushing on this.
No problem. I really appreciate everyone's help on this.
Okay, we have Jeremy next.
Yeah, just a heads up that the first notebook V7 pre-release is out. Thanks, Stack, for making the release. And if you want to try it locally, you can install it with pip install --pre notebook. And that's it.
Love how understated that is and how big it is at the same time. This is amazing, nice work. And thank you for everyone who looked at this to try to validate before it went out. Thank you for all the work you've done on this, Jeremy. And yeah, pip install --pre notebook, everyone. Okay, Jason Grout.
On releases, I'll just say that was months/years of work. So congratulations again, Jeremy, and all the others involved in that. I was planning on doing a 3.3.1 release today to exercise the new, learn more, sharpen the skill on the new release system. Was the procedure for 3.3.0 recorded? If not, I'll be asking lots of questions. I'm sure it's been a while since I did my first release with the new release system.
It was not recorded, but this one should be simpler in that. In the case that, yeah, we just used the next version spec in the releaser.
Okay.
So yeah, and the Steve has a video around, and I think can be used as a documentation.
Yeah. Okay. If there's, oh yeah, good. Somebody linked it in the notes. The other thing I just wanted to add, there's been a lot of discussion. Fernando brought up some data loss from an implementation using the real-time collaboration. There's been lots of back and forth on that discussion, but it led to 3.3.1 very clearly signifying that the -- collaborative flag that turns on RTC in JupyterLab 3. It will be noted in JupyterLab 3.3.1 as an experimental feature, and just in general that the collaborative feature is considered experimental. Apologies to people that have been using it and haven't been told that it was experimental still.
I linked that issue in your bullet point, Jason. So this is one of those cases where having that experimental signifier is helpful to people, but it's a really bad experience if work disappears and people may not use that feature for a very long time to come. I don't know what it's going to take to fix it because it seems hard to reproduce and it seems like it's somewhat dependent on a networked file system. And there seems to be a lot of circumstances that make it hard to reproduce this bug. But if you have the capacity to work on this issue, this is one of those things where it could really turn off a user to have lost something they worked on. They might just shy away from this whole area for quite some time. So please take a look if this is in your wheelhouse, because I think it's pretty important. Okay, cool. Martin, you're up next. Or is this Martin? Which Martin is this? It is Martin. Hey.
I guess it's me. So I wanted to discuss that PR. I will add the GIF to the chat. So this PR, it's about RTC. So I took some work that Carlos started some month ago about adding a left panel for collaborative editing. And this PR takes some pieces of it. And so what we did, we looked at what VS Code does when in collaborative mode. And what VS Code does, it will show you who is currently connected and who is looking at which file. And then you can click on that file to get focus to open the notebook or to open the file that the people are currently working on. So so yeah, that's pretty much it. So I'm hoping to get some feedback if you have some.
Okay, thank you. It is pretty cool, by the way. If I don't know if you have a running instance to show, but if not, at least folks click on that GIF because it's pretty neat to see JupyterLab look like a multi-user application with people.
I don't have it
collaborate.
running locally. It's I have the tendency to break JupyterLab. And,
Yeah, fair enough.
So yeah, it's not working for me right now.
Okay, Vidar, you are up next.
Yeah, sorry, I lost track of the notes because I was looking at a GIF. Yeah, I've been looking recently at the debugger about improving support for stepping into library code and things like this. So I don't know if this is the right call because it lives in IPyKernel, but I don't know if there's a good relevant call. And I know most of the people who worked on the debugger might show up here. So I think the main problem is that if you want to enable debugging code that is from a library or module, you will immediately step into all of the messaging logic of IPython and IPyKernel, which is a bad experience. And the only filtering support that DebugPy supports out of the box is by module name or paths, which isn't really what we want because you would have to add async IO and setmq and traitlets and other packages to that to avoid stepping into the kernel loop logic. And if they make changes, you would have to manually curate that list, and it would prevent you from stepping into similar code in your own notebook. So what IPython used to do for the PDB extension was to use a special magical variable called tracebackHide and set it equals to IPython bottom and use that as a cutoff for the stacks. So I was wondering if there was anybody who had actually worked on the debugger that had looked at the feasibility of using this previously, and if they had any input at all on whether this is feasible or just a horrible experience and I should give up.
If you open an issue and tag Johan on it, I bet he knows the answer to this. And one question I have is the experience of seeing all that messaging back and forth the same in IPyKernel as it is in Zeus Python? Do both end up stepping through all that code? If the answer is yes, can we fix this in two spots? If the answer is no, I wonder how Zeus Python prevents the user from seeing that.
Do you know if Zeus Python also uses DebugPy?
I think they use the same Python debugging library, yeah.
Yeah, then I expect the experience would be the same. I haven't tested it on Zeus.
I guess you would step into IPython code.
Yeah.
But you wouldn't see anything related to the kernel, but you would step into IPython code, I guess.
Yeah, because the point is that for IPython, right, it breaks down your cell content to a bunch of AST statements, and you're stepping back into IPython code between each statement. And it's also async, so suddenly you might step into some other async task if you're not careful. So it's not a pleasant experience out of the box. So you need to have some sort of filter. So, and I don't think that as long as you don't, replace the code runner of IPython core, I don't think you'll have a different experience in other Python kernels.
Okay, so yeah, I think then your next avenue is to hit up Johan. He will probably have insightful things to say about this, but I think you're right. Like I've noticed this myself, and it's not helping me in debugging the code that's actually broken, right? It's just showing me a lot of the back and forth that has to happen to get my results on the screen, which isn't exactly the same as what I want to see. So I think this is a good avenue to improve the user experience of debugging.
Right, I'll hit up Johan. I'll find that. Thanks.
Cool, thank you. Alex, you're up next.
Yeah, so this is more of an open question and a bit of a callback to a previous discussion. I forget how many months ago it was now, but at one point it was raised that we want to completely overhaul the launcher, make it more extensible, and kind of make it behave like widgets do in like iOS or Android, being able to do lots of different things. And that was a really cool discussion. It was kind of a future task. And I, for the life of me, can't find the GitHub tracking issue for it or any of our previous discussion to follow up on whether or not anybody started that. Because if nobody started it, I would love to, but I also don't really, I don't know where that conversation came from and where any documentation on it is. And despite all my Googling, I can't find it. So I was that was an open question. Is anybody working on anything like that? And does anybody know where the previous conversations and documentation are?
This conversation hasn't come up recently in the calls, as far as I know. What I would suggest is, since you're motivated to work on it and no one who is working on it has come out of the woodwork recently to talk about it, what you might do is open a feature issue on what you plan to work on. That way, hopefully, if there is someone who's done anything, they come out and they talk in that issue. And if not, at the very least, then there's a place to track current conversation, or we might find the other issues to link them together and close the duplicates. Lane has his hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to bring up some feedback about that launcher. If now's a good time, we're almost at the end of the call. If you're looking at working on it. Just share screen real quick. So the other day for most people, I'll go light just so they kind of get a feel for the real deal. But I was asking myself, how do I open the command line? And I was like, how do I get to that launcher thing? And I'm thinking to myself, okay, here's my nav over here. And it turns out you have to open, the file browser and then, the plus button, right, to get to the command line. And I was like, that doesn't, there's all kinds of cool, nifty apps in here. I feel like the launcher should be like a top level thing on the left side of the menu because it has nothing to do with my files. If I'm creating a new notebook, that's one thing, but there's a lot of like TensorBoard is launched from here. There's a lot of stuff that isn't files. So does it make sense to have a little rocket icon or something? I don't know.
Separate from my thing, I just realized that could be a pretty straightforward fix if we just do what all web browsers do, which is add like a plus tab, tab in the tab bar that just, when you click it, it opens the launcher. I feel like that's actually pretty comparatively low-hanging fruit to redoing the whole launcher. Yeah, if you want to just open an issue on that and then you can tag me. I'm willing to actually tackle that as a little bit of preliminary work towards a better launcher.
Alex, I've been thinking about that, and I'd be willing to help too.
So Jeremy links an interesting extension built by Fred for an enhanced launcher. What is the story with this extension? Is it something you envision as something that could go into core? Is it experimental? What's the status on it?
We could make it into core. So the starting point was a PR I added in the note about some thinking to refactor the current launcher, mainly by merging the two sections, kernel and console. But I think, as Alex mentioned, there is an opportunity to make it even more extensible, because I think what people would love would be to be able to plug kind of panel within the launcher with custom things. What is even not possible in that extension, Jeremy, I think.
Cool. So, Alex, I would suggest then making that one of your ports of call for where you want to start and what functionality you're thinking about. Yeah, I think that the launcher, like where I work, we overrode the launcher because we needed custom functionality, and I've heard this story from other people as well. So the extensibility of it, I think, is probably going to be welcome by lots of people in the community. And as prime real estate, like the first thing you see when you open JupyterLab, I think it is high impact. And so giving more thought to the experience of what you see in the launcher and how it works is going to be pretty valuable.
Yeah. What would be a good avenue for getting some, I guess, what would be the term? Some like design ideas, like, because as you said, there's lots of people who have overwritten it. Would there be a good way for me to find out what some of the other ideas people have had when they've overridden it before? Kind of like as a basis, because it's really hard to start from scratch saying, oh yeah, we want it to be extendable and overridable and be able to do all these things. But when you start like actually getting to it, like that's a lot. Which is probably why this current old PR took what we currently had as a base and it improved it, but it's still, from what I can tell from the screenshots and GIFs, it's still stuck with like categories and panels.
Tony, what are you thinking?
I just wanted to say, like, as an experiment, JupyterLab Starters is a super cool project Nick wrote. We wanted a way to customize the launcher for classes. So like, open me this notebook for this class. And there are some nice affordances and design features in there. So it's a good place to start, perhaps.
Okay. I want to say Nick was the other loud voice in the room when we previously had the discussion. I was hoping he'd be on the call today, but I didn't see him.
Rick, what were you thinking?
Well, I was just thinking that I had a revelation some months ago that if I looked at the launcher, it was essentially a desktop, much like a Mac OS desktop or a Windows desktop. And if you think about how that's organized, it's simply a file in the or it's simply a directory under the user directory, desktop on Mac OS, for example. And when you double click on something, you just open it. It's just essentially opening up a file, which if it's an executable runs a program, and if it's a file, invokes the appropriate executable and loads the file. And that way, the user is able to extend the desktop. Users are able to extend the desktop fairly easily just by dropping files into the right folder.
Yeah, I mean the shortcut concept I think is valuable here. Vidar, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I was going to say there's also this. I don't remember if it was moved. There was this JupyterLab favorites extension. I don't know if that was ever moved into core or not. I assume it wasn't. But that added like a list of favorite files on like the top of your file browser, I think. I'm assuming if you had a similar kind of collection of favorites, somebody would say then, okay, I write the favorites extension. I will want my favorites to show up on the launcher. So have some way to like make your own space for an extension on the launcher, right?
Yeah, I mean, a combination of what you just said and what Lane was saying before about the command line and some of the other concepts that have come up made me think it'd be neat if you could say drag a button off the launcher onto your sidebar and just have your sidebar have one of the things that was in your launcher hosted in the sidebar from now on. So if you do launch your terminal all the time, you drag the terminal button onto your sidebar. And if you have a specific kernel, like that's the one you always want to launch, and then you drag that there or something like that. But there's a lot of, I think, space here to improve the user experience of it and to make it well, to take advantage of the environment that the launcher's sitting in. I think, Alex, one thing you could do is, in addition to opening a GitHub issue, linking that to a discourse thread to get a wider audience to talk about this and to solicit some ideas for how to improve it. Because, you know, like off the top of our heads, I'm sure we can come up with what seems really cool to have, but it'd be good to have some validation and some sort of numbers from, you know, a wider community.
Okay. Then later after this meeting sometime today, I'll open up an issue and I'll essentially add all the discussion points from the HackMD and the various links everybody gave me in the chat. And we'll use that as a launching point to find out what work's been done, what people are thinking, and give it a good amount of time to percolate before I start diving in directly into code, which is great for Lane's idea, which will allow me to work on something else related to this that will get my toes wet while I'm waiting for that to percolate.
Cool.
And since I have not touched the core launcher code recently prior to a day ago. So.
Fair enough. Okay.
Yeah, thanks for all the feedback, everyone. This was fantastic.
Thanks for putting some thought into this. Okay, next we have Andriy.
Hey everyone, my name is Andriy Yaroshenko. You might remember me from the summer. I'm a Cal Poly Jupyter intern. I was a part of summer cohort, and we worked on notifications extension with Darian and Cameron, and also with support from Brian and from Kevin and from Isabella and from many other people, even including Lane here, right? And many other people who I wouldn't mention. So yeah, I mean, you might know that I'm from Ukraine and there is a war going there. So I thankfully was able to, my family was able to get out like a couple of days before the war started and before the skies were closed down. But I still have like extended family and my friends there. And in particular, Kyiv is getting shelled like every day, and there are, you know, real trauma going on, physical trauma. And my good friend, I was like a best friend at his wedding. He's a surgeon, and he's currently in field teams that work with like people who are getting their stuff traumatized, so to speak. And he reached out to me and asked if I can maybe try to organize, help him like a fundraise for like emergency trauma kits. So that's what I'm here to do. And I have created a Amazon wishlist. It's Amazon Deutschland, Amazon Germany wishlist. And I have added like as trauma kits there. And we have a family member of his in Vienna who can like accepted shipment from Amazon Germany and then like deliver it to Kyiv. It's still possible, like it's not surrounded. So if you would like to participate or help me spread the call, I would really appreciate it. So there is also like alternative ways to help. I have also added it to the description. I will also post this all in chat. I'm really thankful and sorry for the off topic. Have never done this before, and you know, but it's an emergency situation, and I can't not do it. I would be also very like thankful for feedback about this message, about like a better ways to do it, because it's the first time I'm attempting any kind of fundraiser. There were like ideas floating around that something like a GoFundMe or Kickstarter would be a better way. But I thought that Amazon is a good way because you see what you're like helping and where it's going, and you can like track it. So I don't know. Thank you, everyone. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Andriy.
Thanks, Andriy. I don't know if this is subject that anyone wants to comment on, I'll just leave some space for that for a second before jumping to the additional discussion section. Okay. Thanks for the links. Please follow them, folks, if you are interested in helping out. And let us move on to the additional discussion section. I do have one question though. Do we record additional discussion or do we stop the recording here? I believe last week we didn't have additional discussion and we got all the way to the end of the call, so we didn't have to sort that out. It doesn't seem to me that
we decided to do it on a case-by-case basis based on our original discussion to start recording.
All right, well, this looks like any other bullet point to me, and it could have been a regular one. It's just that it might be unbound. So I propose we talk about this until 55 minutes past the hour, and then we stop recording just in case there's any other subject. With that being said, I assume this was added by Jeremy, but who added this point and who wants to talk about it?
Yeah, it's me. I forgot to add it before, so that's why,
Okay, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, it was just another update from last week is due to the funding issues that mybinder.org is experiencing right now. It means that there is a lot less capacity available on Binder, and one of the solutions we investigated for a while was to switch some of the demo environments to use Jupyter Lite. So if you go to that page and you start JupyterLab or Jupyter Notebook, they would both redirect you to Jupyter Lite deployment. And Jupyter Lite deployment is in its own repo right here. Especially in the chat, I will add it to the notes as well. So if you see something that is not working, or if you see something very odd, or you would like to help with the content that we are offering on that Jupyter Lite deployment, then feel free. That would be great. Thanks.
One immediate piece of feedback, and I don't know how to address this, is if you click on the Try JupyterLab and it launches Jupyter Lite, the redirect is the sort that eats up your back button and you can no longer use your back button. If there's a way to resolve that, that would be really nice, because that could be really frustrating. But I think this is really smart, because we don't need compute power for people to see JupyterLab in action and to use Python and to get it working on their computer. So if it turns out that we were burning a lot of money on this and this solves that, that's amazing. That sounds really cool to me.
Yeah, so the issue is tracked on the Lite repo. I think it's a known issue. And regarding the resources, yeah, if you go to the Grafana dashboards of mybinder.org, it's pretty visible that I think the number of pods has been cut by half. So could assume that the cost follow the same trend. And yeah, that's already a gain. Of course, there are a couple of things that don't work. Terminals don't work. But maybe there is still room to improve that.
Do you think that Jupyter Lite could have a terminal based on the JS Linux library by Fabrice Villard? Because, oh man, that'd be kind of amazing, right? You have a whole Linux kernel running in JavaScript inside JupyterLab, running in JavaScript with a Python kernel running in JavaScript. It would be kind of crazy.
So, oh, sorry, if you wanted to answer that, I didn't want to introduce.
No, I was just going to say that no, I don't think anyone has started to look into it, but I mean, that sounds like a very nice project to explore for sure.
Yeah, I had another question is, how large does this make the resources per hit to Jupyter.org? Because if you're changing compute for bandwidth, I don't know how the calculation of those resources compare? But like how large is JupyterLite compared to just regular JupyterLab? I have no idea, but I would assume it was quite a bit larger.
So for Lite, this is like the main cost comes from the size of the static assets, so mostly JavaScript. And then the periodized assets are coming from the periodized CDN right now. So this is not a cost. There is not something that goes through the JupyterLite deployment we have. One thing with the binder setup was that they had already put a maximum number of concurrent users on these two demos, and I think it was set to 100. So, and very often this one was maxed out. So you will have 200 pods, 200 users at a given time, kind of, keeping the resources busy. So this is not the case anymore. So this is free for other binders to run. So for JupyterLite, I think the main issue is the bandwidth for sure. So that's something we discussed with Chris Holgraf on the pull request, is that maybe we will end up having a CDN in front of it, and that should already help a lot.
Sounds well thought through. The only issue I could see then would be if for some reason it's so large that the users over low speed internet can't access it in a reasonable amount of time. So as long as it's within bounds of reasons, it should be. Sounds like the perfect solution.
If it turned out that not bandwidth, but that just the package size was an issue, I wonder if, for example, an updated launcher that did some sort of lazy loading or a JS kernel only version or something like that would be one thing we could look at. But I imagine JupyterLab itself is pretty large, and adding the Python runtime itself, I wonder if it like basically changes the order of magnitude, or if it's roughly the same barrier for loading as JupyterLab itself was, because JupyterLab is a non-trivial application as it is.
Yeah, so loading Paradise definitely adds a couple more megabytes, but they only come when you start the kernel. So when you open JupyterLab, and if you're only interested in the interface, which might not be the case for the Try Jupyter, but still, like if you only open the page, then you would only pull the static JavaScript assets that are almost in the same order of magnitude as JupyterLab.
What are your thoughts on updating the notebook version to be also running the former RetroLab new pre-release at some point? Probably not until we do the full release, but basically soon thereafter, so that also is running JupyterLite.
Yes, usually with JupyterLite we wait a little bit and then we start jumping on the pre-release train. So at some point we will start updating to use the JupyterLab 4 packages and also the Notebook 7 packages, because they are kind of linked together. Maybe in a couple of weeks, I would say. Then we need to decide whether we want that to also be on the Try Jupyter repo. So do we want users to?
Mike is saying it already does, and it does look like it's doing that. It's running RetroLab right now. When I click the Try Notebook link, is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I see. Interesting. So we have to change that tagline there. The original web application for, well, no, actually, if we're calling it notebook and it's notebook, maybe. Although I would remove the Python icon there because it's not really what you're running. The icons here all don't make sense actually, because the JupyterLab one says Jupyter. The Jupyter Notebook one says Python. I think both of those are inapt. Rick, your hand is up. What's up?
Well, it was just about downloading Python with JupyterLab. What happens when people are running JupyterLab on a Chromebook or other device that doesn't have a Python, doesn't have really ability to execute Python, right?
Oh,
Typically,
no, this is a fully client-side, like WebAssembly version of Python running completely in your browser.
Oh, that is fascinating. Thank you.
Yeah, it's really neat. So Pyodide is this completely in-browser version of Python. And so the magic of this is that we are like the whole thing could be run offline. It could be like an HTML file with some static JS assets that you just double click on and it'll run. Okay, it is 56 minutes past. I'm going to stop recording, but we don't have to get off the call. Before I hit the stop button, is there anything anyone else wants in the recording? Okay, cool.